So how many of you have had some kind of experience with God because of God's wondrous creation? I think almost all of us have. It's an honor and a privilege for me to be here. Thank you, Bishop, for the invitation. This Bible study this afternoon focuses on Job. I'm going to read a few passages from the very beginning of the book and from almost the very end of the book. So Job 1 through 3. A man in the land of Uz was named Job. That man was honest, a person of absolute integrity. He feared God and avoided evil. He had 7 sons, 3 daughters, owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 pairs of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a vast number of servants, so that he was greater than all the people of the East. And from the last chapter, chapter 42, verses 1 through 6, Job answered the Lord, I know you can do anything. No plan of yours can be opposed successfully. You said, who is this darkening counsel without knowledge? I have indeed spoken about things I did not understand, wonders beyond my comprehension. You said, listen and I will speak. I will question you and you will inform me. That was God speaking. And back to Job. My ears had heard about you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I relent and find comfort in dust and ashes. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So a little scripture from the beginning and the end, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what happens in between. So good afternoon. It really is an honor for me to be with you. I grew up in North Carolina in Rocky Mount. I was a member of First United Methodist Church there. I had 2 good parents and an older sister. My dad had a good job. He provided for us. Mom stayed home to raise my sister and me. We were all very active in the church, my sister and I, in MYF. I was a Boy Scout. Life was good, as it should be. We followed the rules. We knew that if we lived right, we'd be rewarded. I knew that if I could graduate from a good college, get a good job, and be able to provide for my family, as my dad had done for me, long as I played by the rules, there'd be no stopping me. I'd be rewarded with great success, with wealth, with happiness and satisfaction, with a house, a wife, 2 cars, 2 kids, and a dog. And aren't we all like that for the most part? Good fortune is what we deserve. It's what we work so hard for. God has blessed us with an incredibly bountiful creation. Its resources exist in order to bring us wealth and happiness and satisfaction and the good life. That is exactly how Job lived his life. He was honest, person of absolute integrity, feared God, avoided evil, had 7 sons, 3 daughters, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 pairs of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and lots of servants. He knew that if he just kept the rules, God would reward him with wealth and health and happiness, with wonderful children, with satisfaction. He could have been the poster child for Joel Osteen's theology. You keep the rules. You remain faithful to God. You're rewarded. Job knew the world existed for his benefit. It was there for his taking. Job was the center of his own universe. Problem was, his universe had disappeared by the end of the very first chapter. He lost his animals, his children, his servants, pretty much all at the same time. And in chapter 2, he lost his health. He was immersed in grief and physical pain. He lamented his miserable existence and believed death to be far more equitable than life at that point. It wasn't supposed to work that way for a man of such integrity as Job. He learned rather quickly that his perception of the creation and the Creator was flawed. His view of the creation was that it provided him with all those animals that in turn made him wealthy and happy. His view of the Creator was one who would reward him for living according to the rules. Both perceptions were wrong. According to Job's worldview, his suffering could not possibly be the result of his sin because he was blameless. That's why he takes his case directly to God. He needs God to defend God's self in the face of innocent, senseless suffering. What he demands from God is an honest accounting. This is what he said, "Let me be weighed in a just balance," he says to God, because he knows justice is on his side and he needs God to acquiesce. I really think he'd like to hear God admit to having made a mistake in the case of Job's suffering. But instead of offering an apology or a defense or even an explanation, God spends 4 chapters assaulting Job with questions, 52 to be exact, all but 3 having to do with God's creation and Job's lack of knowledge of how it all works and lack of control over it. Those questions challenge Job in his understanding of God, of God's creation, and of Job's role in it. "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" asked God. "Who set its measurements? Who stretched a measuring tape on it? Can you guide the stars at their proper times? Lead the bear with her cubs? Can you issue an order of the clouds so their abundant water covers you? Can you hunt prey for the lion or fill the cravings of lion cubs? Do you know when mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the birthing of does?" On and on and on God goes. These questions are relentless, 4 chapters worth. See, previously Job viewed creation through the prism of his own success, in which the world is a just place. Later on, he viewed creation through the prism of his own misery, in which the world, for some reason, had all of a sudden become an unjust place. Now, God is forcing him to take a much wider and more all-encompassing view of the universe. God did not create all of this just for Job. He's simply one creature among all creatures. God is saying to Job under no uncertain terms, "I am in charge of creation, Job, and you are not." The human species is not the only one God cares about. All those questions from God worked too, because this is how Job responds. "Look, I'm of little worth. What can I answer you? I know you can do anything. No plan of yours can be opposed successfully. I have indeed spoken about things I did not understand, wonders beyond my comprehension. My ears had heard about you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I relent and find comfort in dust and ashes." Boy, talk about being put in your place. It's so amazing to me that Job's understanding of God used to be based on what people told him about God. And now somehow these creation questions have enabled Job to actually see God. I can't help but wonder if maybe it was God's creation that provided an image of God that Job could actually see. Maybe that's one way we see God. It's not unusual. You all raised your hand. It's not unusual for us to have some kind of spiritual experience by being in nature, is it? If you've been to the Grand Canyon or on a cruise or to the mountains or to the beach or gazed at a beautiful sunset, we've all had those experiences. And for Job, it completely changed his life. Satisfaction for Job by the end of the story comes from knowing his proper place within the greater context of God's creation. No longer did creation exist just for Job. It has an integrity of its own because God created it, period. Could it be that satisfaction for us comes from knowing our proper place within the greater context of God's creation? Ray Anderson founded Interface Carpet Company in 1973 in LaGrange, Georgia. It has grown to become a billion dollar corporation doing business in 110 countries. In 1994, Anderson read a book called The Ecology of Commerce by Paul Hawken. That book provided for Anderson the same kind of transformation that all of God's questions provided for Job, a radical reorientation. Anderson describes it as an epiphany, a spear through his chest, he said, upon realizing just how much damage his corporation was doing to God's creation and how wrong that was. I read the book and wept, he said. So instead of simply putting recycling bins in the break room, he came out with the vision he called Mission Zero, that by 2020, Interface Carpet Company would have an environmental footprint of 0. Several of his senior managers quit immediately, believing that Anderson had become unglued, had lost his mind, and would surely drive the company to bankruptcy. As of 2013, Interface had cut greenhouse gas emissions by 71%, cut energy use by 39%, cut waste by 94%, cut water use by 83%. And are you ready for this? Increased sales by 66%. Doubled earnings and raised profit margins. In '94, his competitors also thought he had lost his mind. Today, they're trying to catch up. And this is how Anderson describes their success. You unleash the creativity of an organization when you hold up a vision that is so outrageous, it takes the breath away. When people are gasping, "What did he say?" All it takes is one person with such a vision, and others grasp it, and before long, you've transformed the world. Wouldn't it be amazing if we had a bishop that would come up with a Mission Zero, that by the year, say, 2030, the United Methodist Church would have an environmental footprint of 0? Wouldn't that be a fun, cool bishop? Where is she? Oh, there she is. People ask me all the time, what can we do to care for God's creation? And they expect me to say, you can recycle, get rid of styrofoam, and drive a Prius. And those are great, wonderful things, and I don't want to discourage any of that. But the lesson of Job, I think, is that we need a fundamental shift in our understanding of God's creation and our place within it. A vision so outrageous it will take our breath away. We have to give up our human-centered perception of creation and take on a God-centered perception. That will transform the world. And isn't that the role of the church today? To be holding up a vision of God and of God's creation so outrageous, it'll take people's breath away. A vision that shatters the constraints of society and frees us for world transformation. Ray Anderson died several years ago, but he was a good United Methodist. So you see, it is quite possible for even United Methodists to come up with some crazy, unbelievably outrageous visions. It is possible. We need some outrageous visions today, don't we? I want to share some now with you. Many of them are from within the North Carolina Conference. Collington United Methodist Church got rid of paper and styrofoam plates, and they used dish towels instead of paper towels. And instead of bemoaning having to wash dishes and towels, they discovered there's a lot of laughter and fellowship and sharing that happens in the kitchen among the volunteers that make all that happen. Now they fill up recycling bins instead of trash bins and host a yard sale every year to prevent more junk from ending up in the landfill. And they give away cloth shopping bags at their yard sale. I suppose it doesn't hurt that they have the name of the church plastered on the side. I call that creation care shopping bag evangelism. Do you have any idea why they do all of that at Collington? Anybody know? Because they're Christians. That's why. Is Collington here? Anybody from Collington here? Thank you, Collington. Highland United Methodist Church in Raleigh installed solar panels on the roof. They also switched all their light bulbs over to LEDs, which saved them, by the way, $11,000 a year in electricity. And then somebody there had the outrageous vision to engage their English as second language classes that they teach at Highland with their community garden that grows 2,000 pounds of produce a year. Now they're able to provide those immigrant families with the ability to grow their own food. And some of the Highland folk are tasting vegetables they'd never even heard of before. How outrageous is that? Why do they do that? Because they're Christians. Is Highland in the house? Yes, Highland's here. Congratulations, Highland. St. John's United Methodist Church in Avon has been influenced by their United Methodist women, who are most all outrageous, to ramp up their recycling efforts. And because St. John's is located at the beach, most members of that congregation are cognizant of God's creation simply because of the beauty of where they feel so fortunate to be able to live. They know what it means to have a relationship with God's creation. Is St. John's here from Avon? Yes. Thank you. Center United Methodist Church in Sanford has a garden, the Saleh Community Garden. They grow organic, sustainable food and give it all away to whoever wants some, no strings attached. Can you believe that? They have a senior citizen health initiative called Senior Seeds. They recognize that the largest contributors to health among seniors is physical activity, good nutrition, social and mental stimulation, and contributing to the good of others. One garden makes all of that happen. Central knows that caring for God's creation and caring for God's people go hand in hand. Where are the Central people? Any of them here? Anybody here? Camden United Methodist Church collects items needed by the local SPCA. Those outrageous Christians believe that animals are also a part of God's creation and worthy of the mission of the church. They're very Wesleyan, those people at Camden. Here's what Wesley said. I believe in my heart that faith in Jesus Christ can and will lead us beyond an exclusive concern for the well-being of other human beings to the broader concern for the well-being of the birds in our backyards, the fish in our rivers, and every living creature on the face of the earth. That was John Wesley who said that how many couple hundred years ago. Where's Camden? Are you here, Camden? Thank you. They're not only a bunch of Christians at Camden, they're a bunch of Wesleyan Christians, and Wesleyan Christians can be some of the most outrageous, can't they? Kitty Hawk United Methodist Church has an earth advocacy ministry that's straight out of the book of Discipline. The Discipline gives us permission to have earth advocacy committees. It's pretty outrageous in and of itself, I think, that any congregation would pay any attention at all to the book of Discipline, but they do at Kitty Hawk. They've done plantings, they've involved children, they've focused on clean water and care of the oceans. It's no mystery to me that 3 of our Creation Care congregations are coastal churches. They know the fragility and the beauty of God's creation, and they don't take it for granted, all because they're a bunch of Christians. Kitty Hawk people, are you here? Anybody? Thank you. University United Methodist Church in Chapel Hill has a creation care group called the Environmental Stewardship Team. 200 of their members have signed a Stewardship of Creation covenant. They put regular reminders in their bulletin of how the members can reduce their carbon footprints. They engage children in helping families know how to do that at home, and they engage the youth, pretty cool, in writing poetry about conservation. They focus on locally grown produce at their potlucks. They've hosted a lecture series on food and ecology. They partnered with North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light, you should remember that, to conduct a free energy audit of their church facilities, and they've made some significant changes as a result. They also have a community garden called the Giving Garden. Started out as a garden to provide food for people in need, particularly school kids who may not have access to fresh produce. They now partner with a local nonprofit called Table. They also partner with the Interfaith Council for Social Services. The Boy Scouts have gotten involved. Neighbors have begun to volunteer, as have many of the children who receive the food. One neighbor is a beekeeper and installed 2 beehives there at the garden. Done presentations about bees and pollination. They have a compost system. They partner with the town of Chapel Hill Parks and Recreation. People visit, picnic, hike on area trails. When a church gets itself out into the community, somehow, some way, it is doing the work of Christ in the world. Do we have any university people here? There they are. They brought a contingent with them. You can look at them and see how outrageous looking they are. I want to show you a short video clip now of another outrageous vision, this time from Dottie Younger. She's a marine biologist turned clergywoman in the Baltimore, Washington annual conference. Dottie used to be the river keeper for the Anacostia River in Washington, D.C. It's one of the most polluted rivers in the country, and it should be no surprise to discover that the Anacostia also flows through a predominantly low-income African-American part of the city. So are we ready with the video clip?
About 6 years ago, I was the Anacostia Riverkeeper, one of the public advocates for the river. And I was noticing folks fishing along the river, and I noticed them taking home what they were catching. And so I started talking to the anglers about what they were catching and what they were eating, and found out that we didn't really know the magnitude of how many folks were eating fish out of the river, but we knew that they shouldn't be eating any of the fish out of the river. So we did a subsistence fishing study and found that conservatively, 17,000 people in the Anacostia watershed are eating fish from the river to put food on the table. 2/3 of the brown bullheaded catfish in the river, for example, have cancerous lesions or sores. Shouldn't be eating fish out of the river. So I thought that what we needed was a messaging campaign to let folks know they shouldn't be eating these fish. They just didn't know. If they only knew not to eat the fish, they wouldn't do it. When I started talking to the anglers, they said, you tell me that I might get cancer in 20 years, but I ask you, what do I put on the table today? What I realized very quickly is that we didn't need a messaging campaign about fish advisories. We needed more food here in Ward 7, but we didn't have that. Ward 7 is one of the poorer wards in the district. There are 8 wards. In Ward 7, there are only 4 full-service grocery stores. That's approximately 1 grocery store for every 23,000 people. Ward 3, which is the richest ward in Washington, D.C., has 11 full-service grocery stores. That's approximately 1 grocery store for every 4,000 people. Listening to the community, I realized we needed more food in the community, more healthy food options in the community, but we didn't have that. So we started to partner with the congregations here in Ward 7 to bring those healthy meals to the churches, and the churches serve a community meal. By partnering with those churches, we were able to do ministry with people instead of ministry to people or ministry for people. The churches are the community bases in their neighborhoods. So they could open their doors and serve the meal and help meet people where they are and build relationships. And that allowed us to do community organizing in the neighborhood, to find really just the extent of the need for healthy food, for sustainable jobs, for an end to violence. All of these things were listed by the neighbors as what they needed. It's called the East Capitol Urban Farm. It's a 3-acre farm here in the middle of the city. And when it gets finished being built, which it will be in the spring, there will be portable greenhouses and portable fish tanks. And they'll be able to raise fish and produce in a closed-loop system in an urban environment, taking up a very small footprint and creating little to no waste. In the meantime, the rest of this site is a community farm for the folks in the neighborhood. There are raised beds of various sizes and heights so people of all ages and all abilities can grow their own food, in addition to the food that will be grown through UDC and its greenhouses and its fish farm. And then at the top of this farm will be a farmer's market where we'll be able to sell this food to the neighbors living in this community, especially at the affordable housing complex across from the farm. The other side of the street, that's where a Walmart was supposed to go. But Walmart has pulled out of the deal. So this is going to be the place where people can come and get fresh, affordable food. This farm happened because the University of the District of Columbia came together. The DC Housing Authority, which owns this land, leased it to UDC to build this farm. The Fish and Wildlife Service, the Environmental Protection Agency, the United States Department of Agriculture, my church, a local nonprofit that employs disadvantaged youth and teaches them green jobs. All of these partners came together over the last several years to build this farm. When do you ever have that many agencies and groups and organizations come together? And it was the Holy Spirit who was leading the way all the time and putting us all in each other's path, only after we had listened to what the needs of the community were. And now this farm will be here so that no one will need to go hungry. Residents can raise their own food and sell it and earn some money, and youth in this neighborhood will have green jobs on a technology that nobody else in the city has. And for the first time in my ministry, I see a way to put myself out of a job. This kind of work, these kinds of partnerships, responding to the Holy Spirit, we're going to be able to tackle food security and unemployment and violence in this ward of the district and tackle them in a holistic and systemic way and break the chains of oppression. And I will be very happy. I long for the day that I am out of a job and no longer need to fight the oppression, because we have built a garden. We have returned to a garden here in Washington, D.C.
Why did she do all that stuff? Yeah, because she's a Christian. Last year at annual conference, Benson Memorial UMC submitted a resolution on climate change, which you guys passed. They cited the Genesis text of being created in God's image, Jesus' teaching on loving neighbor as self, United Methodist social principles, science, the progress we've made in terms of environmental policy and the need to go much further, all as motivation for doing something. They urge a reduction in CO2 emissions to 1990 levels. They urge the U.S. to adhere to the Paris Climate Agreement. They urge the North Carolina Conference to adopt a comprehensive land use policy and congregations to reduce their environmental footprints. They ask the conference to send that resolution to all state government leaders and to present it to General Conference in 2020. Any Benson people here? Benson Memorial people? Thank you. Sotiko Pagulayan lives and works in Cambodia for one of our missions there, working with very low income and subsistence rice farmers in Cambodia. For thousands of years, farmers in Cambodia have been growing rice. Today, due to climate change, there's either too little rain or too much. And the one thing these farmers have known how to do for thousands of years, they can't do anymore. Consequently, their self-esteem has been almost totally wiped out. So Tico is helping them learn new techniques of rice farming and introducing new strains of rice that are more tolerant of weather extremes. He's also working with them to think about other sources of income so they're not quite so dependent on growing rice. But what I'm really trying to do, he recently reported, is help them remember that they were actually created in the image of God because their self-esteem is so low, they don't even understand themselves as being children of God anymore. Whoever thought that climate change could affect the self-esteem of rice farmers in Cambodia? So here's this sustainable agriculture guy helping Cambodian rice farmers understand themselves as children of God. How outrageous is that? Climate change causes suffering for God's people in many parts of the world, the consequences of which we're completely unaware. But isn't that the mission of the church? To be in relationship with those who suffer? The writer of John's Gospel indicates that somehow Jesus was present with God at creation and that everything that has ever come into being has come into being through Christ and for Christ. And according to Paul, Jesus is the Redeemer not just of humanity, but of everything that God has made. If this is really the case, then doesn't that challenge the church in terms of how we understand who we are as disciples of Jesus Christ? Being a Christian is not just believing certain things, is it? It's a lifestyle. It's living our lives as closely as possible to the way Jesus lived his life. And he lived a pretty outrageous life, one that was so outrageous it got himself killed. We have a totally outrageous camp in this conference, Camp Rockfish. Whoever would have thought they'd be connected with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the USDA, the Longleaf Alliance, the North Carolina Forest Service, and with Fort Bragg, the U.S. Army, in a longleaf pine restoration project to plant 37,000 longleaf pine seedlings. Red cockaded woodpeckers are endangered, and they're almost totally dependent on a longleaf pine ecosystem. Camp Rockfish and Fort Bragg are restoring habitat to ensure the survival of one of God's precious creatures. I don't know what motivates Fort Bragg but I do know what motivates Camp Rockfish. You know, because there are a bunch of Christians at Rockfish. How outrageous that the United Methodist Church and the U.S. Army are working together to look after some woodpecker. There's a clergy woman here in the North Carolina Conference, Grace Hackney, who founded a ministry several years ago called Life Around the Table. Grace is so outrageous as to believe that bringing clergy away one day a month to a farm for Sabbath might actually be good for the clergy and the churches they serve. Can you imagine that? And to think that coming together for a meal is more than just providing nutrition for our bodies. It provides spiritual sustenance, a sense of community, communion with God, relationship to farmers, to God's creation, and on and on. She also has this crazy vision of our gardens on steroids, that our churches can provide land for young farmers who can't afford to buy it. Can our churches get together with young farmers? What an outrageous thing to think, Grace. Our bishop is so outrageous that she requested a Creation Care ministry team for the North Carolina Conference. If you're connected with that team, stand up, please. If you're on the North Carolina Conference Creation Care ministry team, there's 22 all together. Not all of them are here. So take a look at these people. They look pretty normal to me. They don't look so weird. They look fairly normal. There's 3 work areas of this team: advocacy, theology, and a Green Church resource group. You'll be hearing more from this team as time goes on. And there's a green sheet in your welcome packets that explains more about this team. But the important thing here is, if you sense in your own self some connection between your own personal faith in Christ and some commitment to care for God's creation, if you have this something going on in your life that somehow mysteriously maybe sort of puts all that together in your life, we'd love to have you join this team. And what we'd really like too is a pretty good diversity of thought and opinion among you on this team. The problem with Creation Care teams, either for an annual conference or for an individual church, is oftentimes it's the tree hugger people that are on the team. But these teams can be far more effective if there's a much greater diversity of thought and opinion on those teams. I'm cognizant of my time here. Gus Speth used to be the dean of the forestry department at Yale. Several years ago, he was addressing a group of religious leaders. Do we have any of those here? Religious leaders? And this is what he told them. This is the forestry guy now, and this is what he told the religious leaders. I used to think the top environmental problems facing the world today were global warming, environmental degradation, and ecosystem collapse, and that we scientists could fix those problems with enough science. But I was wrong, he said. The real environmental problems are not those 3, but greed, selfishness, and apathy. And to address those, he said, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation, and we scientists don't know how to do that. We need your help, he said to those religious leaders. There was a handful of evangelical religious leaders in the audience that day who were so convicted by what Speth said, they went away and formed the Evangelical Environmental Network. And here's what they believe, the EEN people. 1, Christ died to reconcile all of creation to God. 2, all of creation belongs to Jesus. 3, it fulfills the great commandment to love God and love what God loves. And 4, pollution hurts the poor the most, and Christians are called to care for the poor and the less powerful. Thus, and these are their words, thus caring for all of creation provides a Christian with the deepest sense of joy and contentment, since it is part of loving God. We call this creation care. I love that. connect caring for creation with loving God. They're very conservative, those EEN people. This is not just some left-wing liberal mission in the church. I've been saying for years that caring for God's creation makes for some pretty outrageous bedfellows. There are liberals, conservatives, and everything in between who care about creation. And wouldn't it be nice if creation care could bring us together again, liberal and conservative? What an outrageous gift that would be, both to creation and to the church. Sardona is a United Methodist pastor and pig farmer in Nigeria. When my wife and I were missionaries there several years ago, I turned 40. I grew up in eastern North Carolina eating pigs. So for my 40th birthday, my wife Denise decided we'd have a pig picking, invite the village, and have a big celebration. She asked Sardona if he'd cook a pig for my birthday party, and he happily agreed. But the day before the party, Denise and I were sitting on our front porch, and we noticed Sardona walking up the sandy path to our house with a pig on the end of a rope, like you'd walk your dog. So Sardona and this pig come walking up the path into our yard, and Denise goes down and meets him, and she says, "What are you doing here today with this pig, Sardona? The party's not till tomorrow." To which Sardona replied, and I think it must be one of my favorite lines in all of Nigeria, "The pig must spend its last night with you." And he tied that pig to a tree in our backyard where it spent its last night before we took its life in order to celebrate my birthday. I believe Sardona had some kind of covenant, some kind of relationship with that pig, and somehow he needed us to do the same. We don't seem to have that kind of relationship with pigs in this country, do we? I'm not certain of my statistics here, but I suspect there are more pigs than there are United Methodists in the North Carolina Conference. I imagine we're outnumbered, and there have been some pig farmers in eastern North Carolina who've received criticism for the way in which they raise pigs and deal with the waste, and I believe some of that criticism may be appropriate. But here's what else I believe. I suspect that some of those pig farmers are sitting in our pews on Sunday mornings. In fact, some of them might be right here, right now. It's hard to demonize someone if you're sitting with them in a Sunday school class, isn't it? Or on the same pew in worship. And some of those pig farmers are victims themselves, victims of a corporate agriculture mentality that takes advantage not only of the land, but of the animals and even some of the farmers. Years ago, I did some policy work in Virginia. We were working on mountaintop removal coal mining issues and discovered that there were coal company officials sitting in the pews of Abington United Methodist Church. I couldn't see it as a fight anymore. It can't be a fight. It's not us versus them. It's not there's an enemy out there and we have to have winners and losers, because in the church, they were us and we were them. Some of you think this issue is political, that if you're a Republican, you can't have anything to do with caring for the earth. That's only for those left-wing Democrats. But did you know that in the U.S. House of Representatives right now, there is a Climate Solutions Caucus. And if you're a Democrat and want to join that caucus, you have to bring a Republican with you. And if you're a Republican and want to join, you have to bring a Democrat with you. Right now, there are 39 Republicans and 39 Democrats working together to craft environmental policy to do something about climate change. That shouldn't sound outrageous, but it does now, doesn't it? It will take all of us to come up with solutions. That's why the church is in such a unique position to make an incredibly outrageous contribution to caring for God's creation. The church can invite to the Eucharistic table of Christ pig farmers and coal company officials, climate change advocates and climate change deniers, polluters and tree huggers, sustainable organic farmers and factory farmers. The solutions will require all of us. We cannot spend our time fighting with each other. We have to spend our time sitting around the table of grace, the table of love for one another, the Eucharistic table of Jesus Christ, arguing, probably, but if we really deeply listen to one another in love with Jesus Christ and with each other, then I have no doubt that the church can and will transform the world. We are just that outrageous. But where will the next outrageous vision come from? Well, from you, of course. So what in the world are you waiting for? Thanks be to God.